Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for March 20th, 2023. Perhaps you were awakened this morning to the sound of banks crashing. And at the same time, we're seeing just an unbelievable increase of hypocrisy coming from the international community in relationship to Russia and Ukraine. So I'll take up these two stories and the sub-theme today is Tony Blair, still a war criminal after all these years. So when you look at the banking system and you have to ask yourself, what happened this weekend? The second weekend in a row where central bankers had to meet to figure out what to do about collapsing banks. Cooking up another multi-billion-dollar bailout scheme to bail out the bankrupt swindlers who are running the global casino. The problem they had to deal with this weekend is how to stop the unraveling of Credit Suisse, the second largest bank in Switzerland, from triggering a chain reaction default of derivatives, which could threaten the notional value of up to $2 quadrillion in derivative trading. Now, it started Friday with a plan for the Swiss National Bank to bail out Credit Suisse. They made a proposal for a $54 billion bailout. Well, by Sunday, it became clear that wouldn't work. And so a new plan came up, a $225.6 billion bailout from the Swiss government that would allow for UBS, the largest Swiss bank, to take over Credit Suisse. Now, how are you going to finance this? The Swiss government's got that much money? Well, actually, here's what's happening. The Federal Reserve announced a plan for an unlimited flow of dollars in the form of dollar swap lines, where they'll make dollars available in return for currencies of other countries. Although it's unclear when these swap lines will be called upon. In other words, it may be an indefinite bailout. After 7 days, it may be extended for another 7 days, another 7 days, who knows, another 7 years. The 7-day loans are to central banks. In this case, the UK, Switzerland, Japan, Canada, and the European Central Bank. So all of them will be the recipient of as much dollar cash liquidity as they need. This raises the question, what happened to the plan to defeat inflation by slowing down quantitative easing, by raising interest rates to stop the flow of money from the Fed? Out the window because of the banking crisis. What this does is expose the whole system as a giant Ponzi scheme, going back to the failure to adopt the proposals of Lyndon LaRouche in 2008, when that Ponzi scheme, the mortgage-backed security bubble, popped. LaRouche proposed very clearly that you need to go back to regulated banking, you need to direct credit to physical production, you need to stop the flow of funds for bailouts, and you need to invest in areas which will have a increase in productive wealth available for all countries. Instead, bailout. And along with bailout, when the Dodd-Frank bill came through, bail in, that depositors' money could be considered as part of the bank capital in order to do these bailouts. Now, as a result, you had trillions of dollars in the period between 2008 and 2010, and then trillions more, estimates of over 20 trillion each time in 2008 to 2010, and then again after 2019. And what did that do? As LaRouche warned, it triggered an inflation. Now, how do you stop the inflation by using interest rates? Well, you risk the danger of chain reaction defaults. And so they're caught between these two dangers. Now, remember, the people orchestrating this include Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, and Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, who, by the way, Yellen was the preceding Federal Reserve Chair to Powell. Both of them said inflation would be transitory. In other words, it would be short-lived and it wouldn't be a problem. and they refused to acknowledge the role of the Federal Reserve in creating the inflation by pumping money, but even before that, by not putting the system through bankruptcy reorganization so that brain-dead corporations continued to be kept alive with the flow of funds from the Fed through various mechanisms. They're doing that again. Remember then, after the inflation hit, they talked about stubborn inflation. Now what are they saying? Holy shit, we need more cash. Those are the people running the financial system on behalf of the private financial and corporate cartels that are insisting on sticking to the idea of a neoliberal economic system of unregulated banking, privatization, and global so-called free trade at the expense of the sovereignty of nations. Now, the total so far that we know of the bailouts, you have the bailouts of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Silvergate. These banks have over $278 billion in deposits. So that's almost $280 billion that could be guaranteed by the Fed. Then you have First Republic Bank, another $30 billion bailout, but that's done by private banks, somewhat reminiscent of the rescue scheme by the New York Federal Reserve in 1998 of the long-term capital management hedge fund. Then you add on to that Credit Suisse, UBS, another $254 billion and counting. Now do you wonder why so many countries are signing up to join the BRICS Plus, looking for an alternative financing system to the dollar? And by the way, these money lines, these swap lines available to the central banks of the most so-called advanced sector, what happens if you're a poor country and you need a bailout? You get put under IMF conditionalities, where the debt comes first and the country comes last. So we're seeing a systemic breakdown, exactly as Lyndon LaRouche forecast, and going back really to 1971. We'll be covering more on this. There hopefully will be a Twitter feed available from a discussion between Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Dennis Small of the Executive Intelligence Review. As soon as that's available, I'll include the link for you. Now, the second story we're looking at is the indictment of Vladimir Putin of the International Criminal Court, indicted for saving Ukrainian orphans by moving them out of the war zone to Russia. Supposedly that's criminal kidnapping, ignoring who the real kidnappers are. So the indictment comes while Bush and Blair, the real war criminals, are still running around free. So the hypocrisy is highlighted, but let me just give you a couple of points on this. Remember, it was 20 years ago today, 2003, when Blair and Bush unleashed the military of the U.S. and the United Kingdom against the people of Iraq. They did it on the basis of a lie, a pretext. Sir Richard Dearlove of MI6 produced a dossier that said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that were about to be unleashed. They never found any weapons of mass destruction. It was all a lie. But I want you to listen to what Blair said, and keep in mind, the reason I'm focusing on Blair is that Bush and Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, they're examples of what is often called by LaRouche America as a dumb giant on a British leash. They had certain reasons for doing this, mostly because the military-industrial complex wanted another war, and they were afraid that if Saddam were allowed to stay in power, he was moving with other countries toward the possibility of a new financial system. So they took him out along with over 1 million people in Iraq. But listen to what Blair said. This is on March 20th, 2003. He said, "I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action in Iraq today. They will be engaged from air, land, and sea. The mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction." So in his speech, Blair admitted that regime change was the mission, and lied that they would find weapons of mass destruction and remove them. He went on to say, as so often before, on the courage and determination of British men and women serving our country, the fate of many nations rest. Well, the fate of many nations rest on the lies that are behind the grand strategy, or the grand chessboard, the global chessboard of British geopolitics. And Blair finished by saying, quote, dictators like Saddam Hussein, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, threaten the very existence of such a world, a peaceful world, unquote. Keep in mind, Al-Qaeda largely grew up as a result of British-American operations in Afghanistan in the 80s, and then continued after the invasion of Iraq. Now, what happened with the invasion of Iraq? Thousands of people were killed, hundreds of thousands, cities were leveled. And now we're seeing the attempt to continue the war in Ukraine. I would argue that the indictment of Putin is partly to justify the continuation of NATO's war against Russia in Ukraine. Now, what is the International Criminal Court? I don't have time to go through the details, but the International Criminal Court was originally a project of something called the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, which was part of George Soros' Open Society program. And Soros, as we know, is a longtime proponent of the Ponzi scheme financial system and against Russia and China. So what we're dealing with now is a changed world. And it's the world in which the bankers are reacting out of fear and panic. The International Criminal Court is deployed by the same bankers out of fear and panic. And they have good reason to be afraid, because today Xi Jinping will be meeting with Putin to discuss the next phase of their move toward the potential for a new financial system, a new economic system that includes the interests of all sovereign nation states, including the United States and Europe, were we to get out from under the control of these corrupt oligarchs. So thanks for joining me today. Look for the link when we get it to the discussion of Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Dennis Small on the financial crash, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.